What if I told you that your deepest pain could be the source of your greatest strength? Take a moment to consider how radically different your life might be if you stopped treating suffering as your enemy and started seeing it as your greatest ally. We live in a culture that constantly urges us to avoid hardship, to numb ourselves at the first hint of discomfort, and to seek out every possible convenience that technology and modern life can offer. But what if that approach is actually keeping you from unlocking your 0038 full music potential? That's precisely what the German philosopher Friedrich N. believed. He argued that suffering isn't something to flee from, but rather a force we can harness, a catalyst that can spur us to tremendous heights of creativity, resilience, and personal excellence. N's perspective on suffering is especially relevant today when we're inundated with quick fixes and simple escapes from anything that causes us pain. His message stands in stark contrast to the constant pursuit of comfort. Pain is not a sign of weakness. It's the birthplace of strength. When you begin to see challenges and hardships as teachers rather than obstacles, you discover that moments of despair, frustration, or anguish can be the very fuel that drives you to become exceptional. In other words, it's often the times you feel most broken that lead to your most profound breakthroughs. If you let them over the course of this video, you'll learn why he believes so firmly in the transformative power of suffering. You'll gain a deeper understanding of how he saw hardship as 0150, a gateway to growth rather than a roadblock, by delving into his core concepts like the Übermensch and the will to power. You'll see how adversity can be strategically embraced to elevate your life to unprecedented levels of meaning and impact instead of dreading those moments of pain and uncertainty. You'll discover how to reframe them, cultivate an unbreakable spirit, and channel your struggles into something extraordinarily productive. If you watch until the end, you'll walk away with practical insights on how to reinterpret your own suffering and use it as a springboard for self-discovery. You'll learn to reject the mindset that views pain solely as a burden and instead adopt the belief that struggle is an integral part of becoming the strongest, most authentic version of yourself. You'll hear why N was convinced that avoiding hardship at all costs is one of the biggest mistakes we can make, and how it leads to a half-lived life that never truly taps into the depths of our capabilities. More importantly, you'll find out how you can incorporate Nietzsche's 0303 philosophies into your everyday life, shifting from a default response of resistance and dread toward a more proactive stance that sees problems and setbacks as vital elements of growth. Whether you're facing an uphill battle at work, wrestling with a personal crisis, or searching for a deeper sense of purpose, Nietzsche's bold challenge to embrace suffering could be the very key that propels you to new heights. His ideas may not always be easy to swallow. After all, they force us to confront discomfort head-on, but they hold the promise of a more dynamic, empowered, and ultimately fulfilling existence. So if you're ready to discover how your hardest moments can become the stepping stones to greatness, stay with me. Nietzsche's guide to using suffering as a powerful tool for self-transformation might just be the spark you need to start viewing pain in an entirely new light and to rise above your limitations in ways you never thought music possible. Now that we've established the idea that suffering can be a pathway to strength rather than a roadblock, let's 0424 dig into Ian's perspective on why hardship is so central to the human experience. He famously declared to live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. It's a statement that can sound grim at first. After all, nobody enjoys the idea of endless struggle. But what he is really saying is that living, truly living, means you'll inevitably run into pain, obstacles, and disappointment. Those are natural elements of being alive. You can't escape them, no matter how hard you try. Once you accept that suffering is woven into the very fabric of existence, you begin to see that the difference between merely enduring life and thriving in it often comes down to how you interpret and respond to that suffering. According to to survive is not just about staying alive physically. It's about discovering or creating a meaning that transforms your suffering into a force that propels you forward. It's about refusing to crumble under the weight of your problems and instead forging purpose out of them. By doing so, you're not just surviving, you're evolving, growing, and becoming stronger in ways you never would have otherwise, for suffering was more than just a fact of life. It was an essential ingredient for personal growth. He believed that everything worth having, whether it's profound insight, unshakable confidence, or original creativity, comes at a cost. Think of it this way. When you go to the gym, you lift weights that challenge your muscles, causing them microscopic tears. While it hurts in the moment, that discomfort is exactly what triggers your body to rebuild. Stronger muscle fibers, 0614. He saw the same principle at work in the mind and spirit. Enduring heartbreak, disappointment, and setbacks pushes you to confront the vulnerable parts of yourself. It peels back layers of complacency and forces you to step up, adapt, and define your approach. In his view, a life free of all difficulty might seem appealing at first glance, but it's a life that would rob you of real transformation without challenges. We risk remaining stagnant, never discovering the deeper resources of courage, creativity, and resolve that lie dormant within us. And it's not just about pain for its own sake. Nietzsche wasn't saying, go out and get hurt for fun. Rather, he was pointing out. That pain is an unavoidable aspect of existence. And if you try to dodge it completely, you also dodge the lessons it has to teach you. Now let's compare this view with how most people approach pain and suffering today. Many of us live in a world that prizes quick fixes, instant gratification, and constant convenience. Whether it's food delivery at the push of a button, streaming entire TV series without leaving the couch, or leaning on social media for temporary distraction, modern technology makes it incredibly easy to sidestep anything uncomfortable. As a result, we've grown so used to seeking comfort that we often interpret any kind of hardship as a failure or a flaw. If a relationship becomes tough, we might think this should be easier and give up. If a job becomes challenging, we might assume I'm not cut out for this and look for something simpler. Our cultural messaging often encourages us to avoid the grind, to keep ourselves endlessly entertained, and to reach for a convenient escape. Whenever life gets tough, Nietzsche's philosophy directly confronts this mindset. He would argue that our collective obsession with avoiding adversity actually undermines our capacity to become remarkable individuals. When we dodge every obstacle or sanitize every hint of discomfort, we miss the growth that comes from wrestling with those very challenges. We lose opportunities to develop resilience, empathy, perseverance, and creative problem-solving skills. In other words, the modern pursuit of endless comfort might spare us a little pain in the short term, but it can also rob us of real growth. In the long run, his take on suffering can serve as a powerful reminder that hardship isn't always a sign something has gone wrong. Instead, it can be a natural and even necessary part of a meaningful life. If you think back to any of your own struggles, maybe a big test at school, a conflict with a friend, or a period of uncertainty about your future, you'll likely recall how those moments, however painful, eventually led to insights or changes in your behavior. Perhaps you studied harder and discovered a new passion. Maybe you learned to communicate better and saved an important friendship. Or you took a leap of faith, tried a new path, and found a calling you love. None of that would have happened without some level of struggle nudging you to adapt. This isn't to say that suffering is always good or that it feels pleasant. It's more about recognizing the pain can be a profound teacher if you're open to learning its lessons, and wants us to acknowledge suffering as an integral piece of life's puzzle. Sometimes a harsh teacher, but a teacher nonetheless. When you adopt that perspective, you begin to see it as a signpost, a set of clues pointing you toward areas where you can grow, improve, or develop new strengths. So let this set the tone for the rest of what we'll explore. Nietzsche is saying, in essence, don't waste your pain. Instead of letting suffering crush you or fill you with resentment, look at it as raw material, something you can shape into wisdom, courage, or resilience. Of course, this idea challenges us to examine our usual responses to pain. Do we blame others, complain, or numb ourselves with distraction actions? Or do we listen to what the struggle is trying to tell us and try to transform it into something meaningful? Overcoming difficulties can spark incredible changes, new passions, unexpected friendships, and personal breakthroughs that might never have happened if everything was always easy. And by deliberately choosing to face hardship, you end up proving to yourself that you're stronger and more adaptable than you initially believed. It's in these moments, he would say, that you begin to glimpse your own potential for greatness. You discover what you're truly capable of when comfort is stripped away, and that discovery can shape who you become in ways that might surprise even you from here on. As we continue this journey through his philosophy, keep this image of suffering as a teacher firmly in mind. We're not going to wallow in misery, and we're not going to glorify pain for its own sake. Instead, we're aiming to understand how embracing hardship rather than constantly avoiding it can spur us to realize our potential. The next major piece of N's philosophy, and one that has captured a great deal of public imagination, is his concept of the Übermensch, often translated as the Overman or Superman. This isn't the comic book hero leaping tall buildings with a red cape, but rather his vision of an elevated human being who has transcended the limitations of ordinary life. Think of the Übermensch as someone who has broken free from conventional morals and expectations, instead forging a new path, guided by their own sense of purpose and creative power. In Nietzsche's mind, the Übermensch embodies the highest potential of humanity, a person who doesn't shy away from suffering, but integrates it into their pursuit of excellence. While the term might sound intimidating, the basic idea is that the Übermensch represents a continual process of self-overcoming, a person who uses obstacles and pain as stepping stones rather than as reasons to give up. This figure is not trapped by the rules society sets or by an internal fear of failure. Instead, they create their own values and continually push the boundaries of what's possible for a human being to achieve. For him, suffering is more than just an unfortunate reality in the life of the Übermensch. It's a powerful catalyst that spurs growth. While ordinary individuals might view adversity as a sign that they've done something wrong or that life is unfair, the Übermensch sees hardship as a challenge, almost like a gauntlet thrown down by fate. In meeting this challenge head-on, they refine their strengths, develop new skills, and deepen their understanding of themselves and the world around them. This doesn't mean the Übermensch never feels pain or despair. On the contrary, they likely experience these feelings more intensely because they're so engaged with life, but rather than let suffering control them, they harness its energy to go beyond their previous limits. In other words, the Übermensch is someone who has learned to alchemize pain into personal power. By confronting life's trials, they come out on the other side with a more profound sense of self and a clearer vision of the values they want to uphold. It's like a blacksmith forging steel. The metal is subjected to immense heat and hammering, but the end result is something stronger and more resilient than before. In many ways, you can see echoes of the Übermensch in various pop culture heroes' characters who, regardless of whether they know anything about and embody aspects of his philosophy, by facing overwhelming challenges and emerging transformed. Think of Bruce Wayne. From the Batman franchise, he experiences unimaginable loss as a child witnessing the murder of his parents. Rather than let that trauma break him, he channels it into becoming a symbol of justice, training himself to the peak of human ability and dedicating his life to protecting others. Although Batman is a fictional creation, the essence of his journey mirrors Nietzsche's ideal. He transforms suffering into purpose. Another example might be Harry Potter, who grows up without his parents and faces constant danger at Hogwarts. He's not a perfect individual. He makes mistakes, feels fear, and endures grief. Yet each setback compels him to dig deeper and fight harder against the evils threatening his world over time. Those hardships shape him into a leader willing to make sacrifices for what he believes is right. You can also see this theme arising through adversity in sports stories like the journey of Rocky Balboa in the Rocky films. Rocky's whole story revolves around fighting against the odds, both literal and metaphorical, to prove he can become a champion boxer. His training montages and personal challenges aren't just about boxing. They're about self-transformation, the same kind that underlies ends. Übermensch. These characters, while fictional, serve as powerful metaphors for what it means to rise above life's trials. They illustrate the principle that greatness often emerges in the furnace of struggle. Importantly, it's not enough to simply endure pain. The key is to use that pain to reshape yourself, to question old assumptions, and to forge new paths forward. That is precisely what the Übermensch does, far from passive accepting suffering. The Übermensch actively engages with it, seeing it as a puzzle to solve or a resource to tap. This proactive stance contrasts sharply with a more passive approach, where one might just complain about problems or try to escape them through distractions in modern culture. It's easy to numb discomfort with endless entertainment or to blame society for everything that goes wrong. But those strategies do little to foster inner growth. By contrast, challenges us to meet hardship with creativity, courage, and a willingness to transform ourselves from the inside out. Another important point is that the Übermensch isn't born fully formed. It's not as if someone simply wakes up one day as this ideal figure. Instead, he envisioned the Übermensch as a potential that exists within humans, one that must be cultivated. That's one of the reasons he spoke passionately about self-overcoming. The process of becoming an Übermensch involves consistently pushing yourself to new heights, questioning hand-me-down beliefs and refusing to remain stagnant. It's a perpetual evolution, a constant reaffirmation of your own life in the face of everything that might threaten to tear you down. This ties back to the idea that suffering can actually serve as a crucible for personal development. Every time you face a situation that tests your resolve, you have an opportunity to learn something new about your capabilities. You might discover that you're braver than you thought, more resourceful, or more 1805 compassionate, or you might find out where you're lacking and use that knowledge to grow stronger. In either case, suffering becomes less of a dead end and more of a signpost guiding you forward. What's especially important to remember is that he wasn't saying only a handful of chosen people could embody these qualities. Rather, he was issuing a kind of challenge or call to humanity to break free from complacency, from old moral codes that stifle growth, and from the fear of standing out or breaking norms. In his view, each of us has the capacity to aim for something higher than just getting by. If you embrace the mindset of the Übermensch, you see life not as a series of burdens that wear you down, but as an ongoing opportunity to make yourself and your world better. This doesn't guarantee a life free from pain, quite the opposite. It likely means you'll encounter more resistance because forging your own path often puts you at odds with traditional thinking or expectations. But the reward, and insists, is a depth of personal fulfillment and a sense of self-actualization that can't be matched by merely playing it safe. One of the challenges in understanding him is that some people misinterpret the Übermensch as a figure who's arrogant or who exercises power over others in a tyrannical way. That's a misunderstanding. The Übermensch isn't about dominating other people or proving you're superior to them. It's about self-mastery, having such a strong internal compass that outside pressures don't break you. The Übermensch might clash with society, but not because they crave chaos or destruction. Rather, they do so because they are creating new values that may run counter to the accepted norms of the time. This act of creating values often emerges from a deep personal confrontation with suffering and the realization that the existing moral framework offers no adequate resolution. Instead of being trapped by those limitations, the Übermensch invents a new, more life-affirming path at its core. The Übermensch concept reinforces the main theme we've been discussing. Suffering, if embraced thoughtfully, can be a lad to something greater. It might be tempting to imagine that a life devoid of pain would be ideal, but I saw such a life as shallow and unfulfilled for him. True greatness emerges in the space where you wrestle with adversity, where you refuse to let disappointment and heartbreak define you. By doing this, you're not just surviving hardship, you're leveraging it for your own evolution. This perspective can dramatically shift the way you respond to challenges in your own life. Instead of thinking, I wish this never happened to me, you might start asking, how can I use this experience to become stronger, wiser, and more creative? The essence of the Übermensch is therefore the power of transformation. Pain and suffering become raw materials like clay in the hands of a sculptor. It's your commitment to growth that shapes those materials into something meaningful. When you see a person who has endured unimaginable trial, whether it's losing loved ones, battling illness, or surviving a deeply unjust system, and still emerges with a heart capable of love and a mind capable of envisioning a better future, you're seeing the spirit of the Übermensch in action. You're seeing an individual who refuses to be crushed by adversity and who uses that adversity as a stepping stone to a richer, more authentic life. The challenge for each of us is to decide whether we want to continue evading suffering or whether we want to face it head on and let it forge us into someone who embodies this higher ideal. That choice, according to N, is a radical one. It demands that we abandon the comforts of complacency and the excuses that come with it. But if we accept the call, we discover a sense of purpose and empowerment that only emerges when we test ourselves against life's hardest moments. Much like the heroes in our favorite books and movies, we learned that adversity doesn't have to be the end of our story. It can be the beginning of a new chapter where we discover just how far we can push the boundaries of what it means to be human. One of the most striking ideas you'll find in philosophy is the concept of or fati, which is often translated as love of fate. This isn't just about accepting your life circumstances grudgingly. It's about welcoming everything that happens to you, both the wonderful and the heartbreaking, with an attitude of genuine affirmation. He believed that to fully embrace life, you have to stop fighting against every setback and disappointment. Instead, you open your arms to the totality of your experience, saying, in essence, yes, this is my life, and I will love it in its entirety. That can sound daunting, especially when we think about the painful realities we often face: the loss of loved ones, failure in school or work, heartbreak, or health struggles. Yet Un's daring claim is that it's precisely by loving these difficult chapters that we discover a deeper, more resilient sense of self. By choosing Qing to love our fate rather than merely tolerate it. We begin to see that each challenge can sharpen our character and deepen our understanding of what truly matters to us. When you love your fate, you aren't just gritting your teeth and pushing forward, you're saying yes to the life that made you who you are, thorns and all. To understand why loving our fate can make life so much richer, it helps to think about how most of us react to hardship. Typically, we resist it when things don't go our way. We complain, feel sorry for ourselves, or try to find someone or something to blame in doing. So we place ourselves in a state of conflict with reality instead of working with the situation we're facing. We waste our energy wishing it weren't happening. A morphatic flips this usual response by inviting us to accept events 2452. Exactly as they are, but more than mere acceptance. It goes further. It asks us to see the hid value in every twist and turn of our story. If you reflect honestly on your own life, you may realize that some of your most challenging moments were also the ones that taught you the most important lessons. Maybe failing a crucial exam made you realize you needed better time management, or a different career path, perhaps experiencing heartbreak, pushed you to understand yourself better and become more compassionate in future relationships. Amor Fati says, don't just tolerate these events. Love them because they've played a role in shaping the strongest, wisest version of you. When you look at your personal history through this lens, you start to see that even your worst days help set the stage for new insights, relationships, or directions you'd otherwise never have encountered. But how does one go about embracing fate in a world that often feels uncertain and unfair? The shift begins in your mindset. First, it's crucial to separate acceptance from resignation. Resignation implies giving up thinking you have no agency or ability to change things. Acceptance in the sense of amor fati is something completely different. It's the willingness to acknowledge your circumstances fully without pretending they're different than they are, and then acting in the most constructive way possible. You might say, yes, this situation is difficult, but I can still choose how I respond by taking ownership of your reaction. By deciding that every event holds a lesson, your attitude shifts from victimhood to empowerment. To illustrate this, imagine you're stuck in traffic on the day of an important interview. The resigned person might boil over with anger, blame the city for bad planning, or give up entirely convinced they'll miss the opportunity. The person practicing amorti, on the other hand, might think this is stressful. But what's the best action I can take right now? Maybe I can call ahead, inform them I'll be late, or consider alternative routes instead of being paralyzed by the situation. You find a productive way to cope. This approach applies to deeper struggles as well, such as losing a job or going through a painful breakup. By viewing every problem as a lesson rather than a final verdict on your life, you open the door to personal growth and change. At this point, you might wonder how exactly one can develop the habit of loving their fate, especially when the fate in question involves suffering. A practical first step is to reframe your thoughts about hardship. Instead of saying, "Why me?" ask yourself, "What can I learn from this?" Or how might this experience be guiding me towards something greater? This simple shift in questioning changes your focus from self-pity to self-discovery. Another useful practice is journaling when you're confronted with adversity. Write down what happened and how it made you feel, then deliberately look for any positive aspect or potential opportunity that could come out of the situation. It's not about lying to yourself or ignoring real pain. By all means, acknowledge those feelings, but it's about actively seeking something useful within the turmoil. For instance, if you've had a major argument with a friend, you might see it as a chance to develop better communication skills or examine the health of that friendship. If you failed at a project you cared about, you might view that failure as pushing you to acquire new skills or try a different path that suits you better. Another powerful method to cultivate amor fati is mindfulness. When you notice yourself sinking into anger or frustration because life isn't going as planned, pause, take a breath, and ask, is there a reason this might be happening? What is this trying to teach me? Mindfulness helps you recognize that your immediate reaction, anger, blame, or sadness, may not be the whole story beneath that initial wave of emotion. There could be insights waiting to emerge. You might discover that your disappointment is pointing to an underlying fear or a flawed assumption you've been making. You might also notice that your biggest source of frustration reveals what you care about the most. For example, if you get upset because your creative work gets criticized, it might show you how deeply you value artistic expression and how important it is for you to refine your craft. By taking a mindful look at your emotional responses, you can start rewriting the story you tell yourself about hardship. Transitioning from life is unfair to me to life is showing me something important. It's important to note that loving your fate doesn't mean passively accepting every negative condition without seeking change. If you live in an unjust environment, you can still fight for justice. If you're in an unhealthy relationship, you can still walk away. If you're stuck in a harmful habit, you can still break it. What amor fati implies is that you don't hate the reality of where you are at this moment. And instead, you see it as a starting point, a raw material that you can work with to shape a better future by loving your fate. You remove the layer of bitterness that often accompanies adversity, freeing up energy to actually address problems. Constructively, you're not weighed down by regret or endless what-if scenarios. Because you've accepted that for better or worse, this is the life situation you must navigate right now. And with that acceptance comes clarity, determination, and a refusal to let circumstances define your potential. Ultimately, amor fati serves as a powerful antidote to despair or cynicism when things go wrong. It's easy to fall into a downward spiral of negativity, questioning the point of trying at all. Nietzsche's philosophy counters that impulse by reminding us that life is inherently unpredictable and sometimes harsh. The question then becomes, how do we respond if we choose to love whatever comes our way, even while striving to improve or change our conditions? We foster a mindset that sees possibility in every challenge. This is especially relevant in today's world, where constant media messages might make us feel helpless or overwhelmed. By embracing amor fati, we start to see ourselves not as passive recipients of faith, but as active participants in our destiny, shaping and reshaping our existence through the way we interpret and engage with our experiences. Imagine you adopt this attitude consistently. Over time, you'd likely notice changes not only in how you deal with setbacks, but in how you approach opportunities. You wouldn't be held back by a fear of failure, because failure itself would be something you love a chance to refine your path. You might take bigger risks in your career or personal life, knowing that even if things don't work out perfectly, you'll learn something valuable along the way. You might also find yourself being more empathetic to other people's struggles, because once you start loving your own faith, including your hardest moments, you gain a clearer understanding that everyone is wrestling with some burden in life. This empathy can strengthen your relationships and even inspire others to adopt a more constructive outlook. Remember that amor fati is ultimately a choice you make every day. It's not about having some mystical control over fate itself, but about controlling your reaction to fate. You decide whether to greet your trials with hatred, indifference, or love, and in choosing love, you're not only dissolving inner resistance that drains your energy, but you're also harnessing each twist of destiny to mold yourself into a more complete, enlightened version of who you can be. One of Nietzsche's most discussed and sometimes misunderstood ideas is the will to power at its core. This concept speaks to the basic drive inside each of us to expand, achieve, and surpass our current limits. It's not just about raw ambition or wanting to control others. Instead, it's about a fundamental life force that pushes us to continually grow and transform ourselves. He believed that every living thing has some form of this will, from a plant stretching its roots toward water to a student striving to master a musical instrument. But for humans, this drive can become something extraordinary when we recognize it consciously and use it to reshape our lives, especially in the face of struggle. The will to power then is that spark that compels you to keep going, to take on new challenges, and to refuse stagnation. It's the inner flame that doesn't just accept what is, but constantly asks, how can I become more than I was yesterday? It's important to note that N's will to power is often oversimplified as a lust for domination. That's not exactly what he meant. While some people might express their will to power by trying to control or harm others, he generally saw the healthiest and most admirable form of this will as a drive toward self-overcoming. It's the force that motivates you to master your weaknesses, confront your fears, and surpass your prior achievements. If you've ever felt the satisfaction of finally nailing a tough piece of music you've practiced for months, or overcoming a physical challenge like running a marathon, you've had a taste of what this concept is all about. It's that exhilarating realization that your potential may be greater than you ever imagined, and that the only way to discover it is through persistent effort and resilience, rather than seeing power as a means to dominate nature. Encourages us to view it as a route to develop our fullest selves. You might wonder how the will to power ties into the theme of suffering and adversity that has been running through these discussions. The answer is that struggle is the very fuel that keeps the will to power alive. Think about times you've grown the most in your own life. Often those leaps forward happened right after a challenging period, a rough patch in school, a difficult job, or a personal crisis. When things are too easy, there's little motivation to change or evolve. You can coast along in your comfort zone. But when adversity strikes, it awakens a deeper determination inside you. You find yourself compelled to solve problems, confront your limitations, and break through barriers you once thought were unbreakable. N's insight is that hardships don't just test you. They can actually catalyze your will to power, prompting you to become someone stronger and more capable than before. You can see this dynamic play out in the stories of countless historical figures. Thomas Edison, for example, tested thousands of different materials before finally inventing a successful light bulb. Each failure could have discouraged him, but instead it seemed to feed his resolve. This is a perfect illustration of harnessing the will to power. Rather than give up in the face of frustration, Edison used every failure as information for his next attempt, eventually transforming the energy of repeated disappointment into the brilliance of a world-changing invention. Another powerful example is Helen Keller, who lost both her hearing and sight. At a very young age, most would have considered her life path hopeless. Yet, through immense persistence, driven by a will that refused to accept defeat, she not only learned to communicate, but also became an influential author and advocate. Her incredible determination to overcome obstacles illustrates the same principle. Adversity lit a fire inside her that pushed her to exceed every expectation society had for her. One reason the will to power is so intimately linked with greatness is that it encourages a proactive approach to life's hurdles. When you recognize that part of you wants to push past limitations, you stop viewing obstacles as unfair punishments and start seeing them as opportunities to sharpen your skills or clarify your goals. For instance, if you fail an important exam, You might choose to double down on studying, seek help from a tutor, or reconsider your learning strategies. If you suffer from heartbreak, you might use that pain to learn more about your own needs and boundaries, ultimately forming healthier relationships in the future by actively engaging with your problems. You're effectively saying, I refuse to let this define me. I will grow from this. This is the will to power at work, a steadfast commitment to turning adversity into advantage. To put this into practice, it's useful to cultivate habits that keep the will to power alive in your daily life. One such habit is setting short-term and long-term goals that challenge you just enough to make you stretch. If your targets are too easy, you won't awaken that inner drive. If they're too hard, you might become overwhelmed, but find that sweet spot. Maybe it's training for a 5K run if you've never gone that distance before, or learning a new language at a steady pace, and allow yourself to build confidence through each small victory. Another habit is self-reflection. Take regular stock of where you stand in relation to your ambitions and where you're facing resistance. Ask yourself, how can I use this difficulty to fuel my progress, or what part of me can grow from this experience? In doing so, you maintain awareness of your forward momentum and avoid drifting aimlessly. It's also important to surround yourself with people and ideas that inspire you to push beyond your comfort zone, whether that's friends who share your vision, mentors who have already traveled a similar path, or even books and documentaries about individuals who overcame enormous odds. These influences act like kindling for your will to power. They remind you of what's possible when you refuse to let obstacles have the final say. This doesn't mean you won't stumble or feel discouraged. All of us experience moments when we doubt our capabilities, yet the key is to harness that doubt and frustration, using it as a wake-up call to refine your approach, seek better resources, or develop stronger mental and emotional resilience. Keep in mind that the will to power isn't about never experiencing pain or never making mistakes. It's about using every moment, good or bad, as a stepping stone towards something greater. This is why I emphasized the unity between struggle and achievement. If you never face any challenges, you'll never discover how far you can truly go. Think of it like going to the gym without resistance. Your muscles don't grow. The same holds true for mental, emotional, and spiritual muscles. Adversity becomes the weight. You lift the tension that ultimately leads to new levels of strength and capability by repeatedly engaging with challenges. You don't just build external success. You also develop an inner toughness and creativity that carry you through life's unpredictability. Ultimately, the will to power is an invitation to see yourself as more powerful than you might initially believe. Rather than being at the mercy of random circumstances, you are an active participant in shaping your destiny. You might not control every external event, but you do control how you respond by consistently choosing to meet adversity head-on, recognizing it as a spark to ignite your inner drive rather than as a sentence to helplessness. You channel the essence of N's vision every time you decide to learn from a setback, to try one more time after you've failed, or to push your limits. Even when you're tired or afraid, you're living out the will to power. It's not a magical formula that guarantees immediate success, but it does lay the groundwork for continual self-improvement and the possibility of achieving more than you ever thought possible. When you think of the people who've changed the world for the better, 4247, be they civil rights leaders, groundbreaking scientists, pioneering artists, or entrepreneurs who reshaped entire industries, a common thread is this unstoppable drive. Their stories prove that greatness isn't reserved for a select few. Rather, it's a potential that exists in anyone who recognizes adversity as the fuel for progress. This realization resonates with what you've already learned about suffering as a teacher and about embracing your fate wholeheartedly. Each concept we've explored ties into a broader message. Life is demanding and unpredictable, but within that very challenge lies the spark of greatness. The will to power is in many ways the engine of that transformation, converting life's inevitable difficulties into a relentless push forward. By tapping into it, you don't just cope with suffering, you redefine it as the force that lifts you to new heights. When we talk about suffering, it's all too easy to focus on how painful and overwhelming it can be. We naturally want to avoid it, minimize it, or remove it altogether. But Friedrich N.E.R. challenges that instinct by framing suffering as a critical test of resilience, an opportunity to gauge and ultimately strengthen your inner fortitude. In his view, the challenges you face are not random punishments, but signals that you're stepping into territory where growth is possible. Think of it like a seed in the soil. Only by pushing through the dirt, grappling with darkness, and stretching itself toward the light can it bloom into a plant. You saw suffering as the rich, if sometimes harsh soil that forces you to dig deep and find out just how resilient you really are. This doesn't mean he celebrated misery for misery's sake. Rather, he believed that hardship could be transformed into an ally, reminding you that you're more robust and adaptable than you might imagine. To better understand why Ain plays so much importance on resilience, it helps to consider his broader philosophy. He didn't just accept suffering as inevitable, he embraced it as a powerful catalyst for self-discovery. For him, true resilience wasn't about withstanding adversity without flinching. It was about emerging from difficulty with a stronger sense of self and a clearer perspective on your values. In other words, resilience isn't the same as becoming numb to pain. In fact, it's the opposite. It's allowing yourself to fully experience pain and then using it as fuel to refine your character. Maybe you've come across moments in your own life when you faced a daunting setback, like losing a scholarship or enduring a painful breakup, and discovered that in picking up the pieces, you tapped into reserves of courage and determination you hadn't known you possessed. That revelation, the awareness that you are more capable than you believed, is exactly what wanted us to uncover through the test of suffering. This notion resonates closely with a modern idea known as anti-fragility, a term popularized by author Nassim Nicholas Taleb. While resilient systems are those that can take a hit and return to their original state, anti-fragile systems actually grow stronger and more adaptable when exposed to stresses or uncertainty. You imagine a coffee cup as an example of fragility. If you drop it, it shatters, and no amount of stress can make it better than before. By contrast, our muscles are anti-fragile. When you lift weights or go for a run, you're inflicting stress on your body. If that stress is appropriate and not excessive, your muscles adapt by growing denser, giving you more strength. In a philosophical sense, he viewed the human spirit similarly. He believed we're inherently capable of becoming more powerful mentally, morally, and spiritually. When we grapple with trials, each time life knocks us down, we can rebuild ourselves to be a bit tougher, wiser, or more compassionate than before. It's important to note that this transformation doesn't happen automatically. Just as in weightlifting, you need to respond to stress in a way that promotes growth rather than injury, and recognize that people can become bitter or cynical when hardships accumulate. The key difference lies in how you interpret and react to life's painful moments. If you curse your circumstances and refuse to learn from them, you might end up more fragile, constantly feeling victimized by the world. But if you approach suffering with a mindset that it can test and refine you, then those challenges become something akin to a training regimen for the soul. Every disappointment, every moment of despair becomes a spark that can ignite a renewed sense of possibility, provided you choose to see it that way. It's this choice to interpret suffering as a catalyst rather than as a dead end that, I believed, separates those who stag from those who ascend to new levels of inner strength at a practical level, cultivating anti-fragility in your life starts with small, deliberate actions that push you out of your comfort zone, much like gradually adding weight to a barbell over time. For instance, consider taking on tasks that are just beyond your current skill set. Maybe you volunteer to lead a group project when you normally prefer staying in the background. Or perhaps you challenge yourself physically by training for a race. Even if you've never considered yourself athletic, by exposing yourself to manageable doses of difficulty, you learn to handle stress more effectively and build confidence in your ability to adapt over time. These incremental experiences add up, making you more equipped to face bigger obstacles without crumbling. In essence, you're practicing Nietzsche's vision of using suffering, or at least purposeful struggle as a tool for growth. The more you do it, the more you realize that many limitations exist primarily in your mind, and adversity is sometimes just the nudge you need to break through them. But resilience also involves acknowledging the emotional weight that suffering can bring. He never insisted on denying or repressing feelings like sadness, anger, or disappointment. On the contrary, he believed it was vital to confront those emotions. Honestly, true resilience means allowing yourself to feel pain, to mourn losses, and to grieve over missed opportunities. Yet it also means not stopping there after that period of emotional processing. Resilience nudges you to ask, what can I learn from this? How can this experience sharpen myself? Understanding or clarify my goals, the willingness to explore these questions candidly, is what transforms raw herd into a stepping stone for future growth. Without that willingness, suffering can calcify into resentment or self-pity, which stands in direct opposition to Nietzsche's call for self-overcoming. Moreover, his view of suffering as a test of resilience dovetails with the concept of self-ownership. He frequently wrote about taking responsibility for your own evolution rather than waiting for external forces to fix your problems when life strikes you down. No one else can decide how you'll respond. 5101, you might look for sympathy or you might try to blame external events, but ultimately it's up to you to interpret your hardships in a way that fosters growth. This act of self-interpretation is central to N's thought, illustrating how subjective experience and personal accountability weave together. If you consider yourself merely a victim of circumstance, you surrender your power to adversity. However, if you view yourself as an active participant in the narrative, someone capable of turning each setback into a new source of motivation, then you activate that inner resilience he believed was latent in all of us. Another angle to consider is how our cultural environment influences resilience. He famously critiques societies that prioritize comfort and security above all else. In such environments, people can become overly sheltered, losing the psychological muscles needed to endure and learn from hardship. Think about how modern conveniences sometimes lead us to avoid challenges. We have apps that deliver our meals, cars that do half our driving, and algorithms that feed us endless entertainment. While these innovations make life easier, they can also dull our capacity to deal with the unpredictable. N's emphasis on resilience serves as a wake-up call. If we never face tension or conflict, we might forget how resilient we can be. Anti-fragility, growing stronger through pressure, requires some form of pressure to begin with, so it's often worthwhile to step outside of the bubble of comfort, whether that means traveling to unfamiliar places, picking up a new skill that initially feels daunting, or engaging in thoughtful debates that challenge your perspectives. Some people may worry that emphasizing suffering and resilience implies a grim, masochistic outlook on life. But Nietzsche's stance is more nuanced than that. He doesn't suggest going out of your way to seek pain at every turn. Instead, and he points out that suffering is already an inevitable part of the human experience. Given that reality, why not approach adversity in a way that benefits you? Why not use those moments to test and expand your capacities, turning them into catalysts for a stronger, more insightful self? In this sense, his philosophy is less about glorifying pain and more about urging us to see every aspect of life, even the painful parts, the essential ingredients in a grand project of self-discovery. By adopting this mindset, you avoid the trap of seeing life as an endless series of unfortunate events. Instead, each challenge becomes another rung on the ladder of growth, reminding you of the resilience you already hold within. This perspective also dovetails with the broader theme of personal agency running through Nietzsche's work. If you look at your sufferings as random punishments without meaning, you'll likely feel helpless and bitter. But if you choose to interpret them as necessary trials that can guide you toward maturity and understanding, you reclaim your agency. Every setback becomes a prompt to ask, where can I go from here? Or how can I use this experience to become more capable and self-aware? This reframing shifts the emotional weight of suffering, transforming it from a shackle into a key that can unlock new dimensions of yourself. It's a bold philosophical stance, but one that has resonated with countless readers who have discovered just how empowering it can be to see adversity not as an end, but as a beginning, a chance to craft a narrative of resilience and self-invention. In the end, resilience through suffering. As an imagined, it isn't about pretending adversity doesn't hurt. It's about recognizing that pain can serve as a powerful mirror, reflecting your innermost strengths and weaknesses. Back to you, when you stare into that mirror, you can either turn away in fear or use the reflection to correct course and push onward. Anti-fragility takes that idea a step further, suggesting that each wave of difficulty can make you more adaptable, more perceptive, and more prepared for the next challenge. This is how you evolve, not by living a life free of burdens, but by learning to carry those burdens with an unshakable determination. His message is that inside every moment of hardship lies a test of your resilience, a test that once passed lifts you to new levels of self-assurance and capability. Embrace that test, and you transform suffering from a source of defeat into the very crucible that shapes your most powerful self. As we arrive at the final part of this exploration into Friedrich Nietzsche's perspective on suffering, let's step back and gather all the threads we've woven together. If there's one takeaway from everything we've discussed about the necessity of hardship, the power of embracing our fate, and the drive to overcome adversity, it's that suffering isn't the end, but rather the beginning of greatness. He never promised that the path would be smooth or painless. In fact, he insisted it would be anything but. Yet he also believed that these very struggles carry within them the potential for profound transformation. When we confront pain head-on, learning from it, adapting to it, and using it as a springboard, we uncover reservoirs of strength and creativity that remain hidden in comfortable times. We've seen that En's concept of the Übermensch or Overman is grounded in the idea that human beings thrive by continually surpassing themselves. This vision extends naturally to the principle of amor fati, loving one's fate, which invites us to welcome every twist of life, even the ones that cut the deepest. Meanwhile, the will to power offers a glimpse of that inner drive, compelling us to keep growing, while resilience through suffering underscores how adversity can be the fire that forges an indestructible spirit. In each of these ideas, the message rings clear. True greatness isn't handed to us on a silver platter, but earned in the crucible of our hardest moments. What does that mean for you? Perhaps you've gone through heartbreak, academic failure, or financial hurdles, and you've questioned your own worth. His answer would be that your worth isn't diminished by hardship. It can actually be revealed and enhanced by it, provided you choose to interpret your pain not as a sentence of doom, but as a call to self. overcoming the greatest achievements in history, be they artistic masterpieces, scientific breakthroughs, or acts of social courage, are so often shaped by adversity that adversity forces us to innovate, to reassess our assumptions, and to craft new paths forward. By adopting this mindset, you free yourself from the limiting belief that suffering is merely destructive. Instead, you see it as a powerful teacher, a relentless mentor that pushes you to evolve. Nietzsche's framework is not about glamorizing pain for its own sake. It's about recognizing the possibility buried within it. In a way, it's an optimistic philosophy rooted in the conviction that no setback is truly final unless you allow it to be. Every defeat can be a beginning, every disappointment a signpost guiding you toward a deeper understanding of what matters most to you. If you remember only one thing from this entire journey through his thought, let it be, this pain does not negate your potential. It can ignite it. Let us close with a line that sums up N's faith in our ability to find meaning amid life's turbulence. He who has a why to live can bear almost any. How carry that message with you. Let your why be the beacon that illuminates your darkest hours, reminding you that in every trial lies the seed of your own 5958 greatness.